Welcome, welcome. So this is the first video that I'm making about elliptic curves. So the main impetus for this is that I've been trying to teach and write and talk about KZG commitments and the way we use them at LegNDA. So the main pointer is Dan Grad's article that he wrote about how to use KZG for basically polynomial commitments that you can multi-proof and open at any point. But that article points to Vitalik's blog post on elliptic curves of pairings, and Vitalik's article points to this Cloudflare article, 2013 article about just the basic math behind elliptic curve cryptography. So I thought it'd be nice to do a just annotated series where we go through the paper together. Basically, I give you intuition for the different things that he's presenting, and maybe put it in a broader context, or just share, some snippets that I've learned along the way. I'm by no means an expert. That being said, I did do a math undergrad and then started a PhD in statistics, whatever that means. That was a long time ago, and I forgot most of it. But at least I have some maybe visual intuition, or I like to think visually and geometrically. So. That's kind of what I'm trying to do here. I think this first article actually does a pretty good job of doing that with lots of pictures. So let's go through it slowly and see what we can learn. All right. So first of all, what is elliptic curve cryptography? Why are we talking about it? Basically, nowadays, I think this was written in 2013. Nowadays, in 2025, basically, you're most likely using elliptic curve cryptography every day when you use a browser. Every time you use HTTPS, underneath using TLS, and TLS uses elliptic curve cryptography for everything from signing the certificates to just doing a handshake to Diffie-Hellman to share a Diffie-Hellman key exchange to share a private key to then encrypt the rest of the communication, all of that. So we'll talk about that. But in the history of math, it's pretty recent that elliptic curve cryptography was invented. Before that, we had just the basic RSA. So that's basically what he says here. When we're looking at where did he say this? So ECC is the next generation of public key cryptography. Um, right. The first generation, of course, being RSA. So I added some extra content here just for comparing the RSA and ECC. So the main difference to know, I think, is that these. Okay, so let's actually look at the visual. So you look at the security level in bits, which I'm not going to try to explain, but the security level in bits compared to the key size that you need to achieve that level of security. So for RSA, right, which to achieve basically, let's say we're happy with a 128 security level. You need 3,000 bits of an RSA key, whereas for ECC, you need 256 bits. So you need a much smaller key for that. Most of you who use GitHub or SSH, you have seen that now when you use SSH keygen, you can generate either an RSA pub key, or I mean RSA key pair, or an ECC. I think it's on ED 25519. And at least I've completely changed to using the ECC ones. They're smaller, so when you kind of copy paste your pub key to GitHub, you can see that it's much smaller just by that. And I think so. He gives extra. There's some extra content here which we'll get back to, but I think this is kind of always interesting to see this level of security in terms of, I think, the amount of energy that it would take to break. I believe that's what it is. It's to break that level of security. Um, okay, so what's the main difference between RSA and ECC? We'll go into the mathematical structure and assumptions that are behind it, but just to start with, the main difference is that RSA basically relies on prime factorization. Can you see what I'm writing? Yes. Prime factorization. And it relies on this being hard. So if a quantum computer comes that can easily factor using Shor's algorithm or whatever, numbers, basically RSA is broken. Um, whereas ECC is completely different. ECC is elliptic curve cryptography. This relies instead on the discrete log problem. Discrete log problem is hard, right? And this one so far, no one has found a faster algorithm. Whereas for RSA, there are ways to basically improve the search for finding prime numbers. There are, I forget the name of the algorithm, but there is an algorithm. And this is the reason behind the discrepancy here between the bit size that you need to reach a level of security. Because factoring large numbers becomes kind of easier and easier as the prime numbers increase. At least that's the intuition that I have. Okay, so let's continue here with this. So zoom in a little bit. Okay, so the dawn of key cryptography. So public key, some of you might also know this as asymmetric cryptography, um, um, as opposed to symmetric cryptography, which is what we know with cipher, what you learn in a first year kind of cryptography course. Um, so public key cryptography is where you use a different key. You have a public key as well as a private key, and they're different. Whereas in the private case, you just have a private key which is shared between people. So the point, what he explains here of public key cryptography, what it like the revolution that came about is because you can basically communicate between you can enable secure communication between two parties without a shared secret. And and this basically is also means that by using this, two parties that are communicating over a insecure communication, meaning the internet, um, meaning that anyone can be listening to the communication and can see the bits being sent, can still come to a shared understanding and create a shared secret that only both of them know, despite everyone else have been listening to all the traffic. And this is the Diffie-Hellman key exchange algorithm. Okay, so this was a revolution. Originally, it came about when these guys invented it by the RSA algorithm, which basically uses the prime factorization. So this has been how it's been done forever. So I think he discussed a bit more of this. So I think what's the note here? Right. Okay. So let's see. That's something I want to dive into a little bit more and pause and ponder about it. Kind of the philosophy behind why crypto works, especially the public key or asymmetric key. And it's this sentence right here. So what you need for a public key cryptographic system to work is a set of algorithms that is easy to process in one direction, but difficult to to do in the other direction. And these kinds of functions it's called a one-way function, or here he calls them a trapdoor function, are the key to unlocking all of this. So, okay, let's write a bit about. So this is the part that I want to dive deeper into. So basically, what are cryptographic primitives? So what allows us to do cryptography? So let's just look at functions. Let's start with this, and then we'll see. So, okay, we have any kind of two-way functions. This is kind of, okay, so I want to separate what is math from what is crypto. And it's kind of an arbitrary distinction, but what I'm trying to say is that there are a bunch of two-way functions out there. Most of them are not cryptographic functions. Why is that? If we first look at two-way functions, so typical examples are, let's say, encoding, what do I have? Serialization, what else? Transformation, reparametrization, reparametrization. So also known as a bijection. Typically, it's something when you encode or you serialize, let's say to JSON, you can always count on bringing it back, deserializing. Same way for all of these things. So this is not so interesting from a crypto point of view, and crypto is more interested in one-way functions, or what he calls a trapdoor function. And examples of this that you guys know is, a hash. And I mean, commitment is another example. There's a bunch of other names that we use for these things, but typically these one-way functions are kind of they not structure preserving. And we'll see what that means. Um, there are a bunch of examples where actually we will want some hash functions that preserve some kind of structure, and I'll also explain what we mean by structure, but I mean some kind of mathematical structure, such as a group structure mostly, or linearity, some kind of thing like that. So one-way function, and then the other kind of next step, which is interesting, is one-way functions plus a well, so it's interesting. I call them trapdoors, but kind of, I guess, reverse trapdoor, right? And this basically is just encryption. Um, so it's when I'm hashing, but there is a way to kind of bring it back. But that should only be able to be done by the people who control some kind of secret, right? So that's very different from the two-way functions that we're used to in math, where anyone kind of, okay, sometimes you need, the the schema for the serialization to be able to deserialize, but that's typically just a public parameter somewhere. Whereas encryption, the whole point is I kind of encode it to this cipher, and only the people who hold some kind of key will be able to enter the reverse trapdoor and bring it back. Um, that's kind of the idea. And then so with these cryptographic primitives, basically we kind of build some higher level, I guess, algos, but really what I want to talk about here is just kind of the structure preserving aspects, which we'll go into. So a hash typically is structure breaking. And okay, so we'll get back to this because I haven't really explained what a structure is, but typically you can think of a group. The group will be the main thing. So an elliptic curve is also a group, which means there's an addition, which like the addition is basically a structure on top of a set. And the hash basically just completely breaks that. It maps your groups to some other space where the the structure of that addition or on the group does not translate to in the new group. So even if you have a map between a group and another one, when you hash to the other set, you just completely destroy that structure. That's very important for when you actually want to destroy as much structure as possible. So when you want to just have a hash function, make sure there's no collision or things like that. But you might have heard of locality preserving hash functions, hashing. So that's something that preserves the structure of locality. Um, so some kind of metric, basically. And okay, we can talk about KZG commitments, which we will get into in a much later stage. But KZG commitments, what they do is they preserve, it's kind of a hash in a sense, but preserves the linearity. And then the linear structure. And well, so yeah, I mean, KZG commitment, I guess, is a bad example because it also has a pairing, which kind of also gives you some extra properties. But what I want to do is FHE commitment. This kind of preserves both linearity plus some kind of multiplication. And then I guess, okay, so there's this digital signature is another example of a function going to another space, and uh, that's kind of a bad example. But the same way that we've seen, if these are all hashes, right? Some of them are structure preserving, some of them are not. You have the whole gamut. And for signing for algorithms, you basically have the same thing. So we'll see later that when you sign, let's say over a group that has a pairing, then you'll want to keep some of the structure to be able to recover the or verify the signature. Okay, so I think I've said enough about this. Let's keep going. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on RSA because the goal of the series is really to dive deeper into elliptic curves. But as I said, so the RSA is really about prime numbers and where the public key and the private keys are just two specially chosen numbers. So I definitely will not kind of explain this. I do think you should, if you've never seen any of this, it's worth going through the example. He just kind of takes an example and here he will just like take a message, UTF-8, encode it to go into a number space, and then he will actually show how once you've transformed into a number, how you can um, go ahead and encrypt it and decrypt it. But I guess what I want to show real quick is just that how RSA works is just that you have some encrypt function which encrypts a message, and this just gives you you take the message. So well, the message here has you we assume or it's already in a field where okay, let's assume message is element of some field FP. Let's say so for those who don't know, this is clock arithmetic. So ZP is just 0, 1, 2 mod P. These numbers with the addition, with addition being the structure, the group structure. But I mean, wait, that's not true. Sorry, this is a field, so it has both plus and times. Anyway, so you do m to the sk, sk being the secret key. This is your encryption here. So exponent again is just equal to m times blah 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 times m sk times. And you can multiply because we're in a field and then decrypt. So this gives you a cipher, and then to decrypt the cipher, you just do m to the public key. You do the same process. And okay, so this all relies on the fact that RSA, basically the whole paper and contribution was that, so if you, to show that these are bijective functions, like, I mean, one is, what I mean is, sorry, it's not bijective. One of them is the inverse of the other one. If you decrypt and encrypted m, you get m to the, well, so you get m to the sk and this to the pk, which gives you m to the sk times pk. And basically, this you're working in mod, actually you're working in mod n, so I lied. This is not a field p, this is actually a field n, which is it's a multiple of two primes. Basically, it's constructed such that this thing gives you back m for every m. I'm definitely not going to go into the details, but right. So you basically there's kind of a setup phase where you choose n, you choose n, the secret key and the public key, and then basically with that, for every message you can encrypt and decrypt. So that's how it works. Okay, so I think now we're ready to go back. Okay, so right, so let's analyze the properties of RSA as a trapdoor function, which here trapdoor, the way he uses it, he just means like a one-way function. So it's a trapdoor in the sense that you can cross it. Once you cross it, you can't come back, which gives you the properties that we want. And you can't cross it. The reason why you can't come back again is because we can't, factoring numbers is hard. So that's what he's doing. There's a beautiful picture here that I've yet to understand. Maybe someone who understands memes better than me will be able to appreciate. But okay, so as I showed in the pictures at the beginning, so these factoring algorithms for the quadratic sieve and the general number field sieve, which are algorithms that we have for the fastest algorithms that we have for prime factorizations, they get more efficient as the size numbers being factored get larger. which means that the gap between difficulty of factoring large numbers and multiplying large numbers is shrinking as the key's bit length gets larger. Okay, what does this mean if we go back to what I had shown right here? Right, so this is basically what I was showing in the beginning, right? So your key size, to increase linearly your security level, you actually need to increase, I don't know if it's exponentially, it looks exponential, but anyways, it basically grows non-linear, like, how do we say, super linearly, your key size. So this is what happens. So if we go back, so that's the issue with RSA. Not going to go more into it, but it is a fascinating subject that I wish I could do more videos on, maybe one day. But okay, so after all this, so we see the issues with RSA, and we kind of know that elliptic curves solve this. Let's see why and how they work. So elliptic curves are a better building block for trapdoor, at least that's what we claim. And again, what are they fundamentally built on top of? Themselves, they're built on the log problem being hard as opposed to so we saw that the problem with the RSA is that factorization, we actually have efficient algorithms, whereas doing log in an elliptic curve, we don't have fast algorithms for doing that, which is basically why these work the way they do. So okay, let's approach this slower. So what is an elliptic curve? He goes and describes the algebra for those who have never seen this. So I think I'll explain it quickly. The geometric intuition and basically the group structure, so how addition works on an elliptic curve. Okay, so what is an elliptic curve for those who know absolutely nothing? It's basically this. So this, we call this elliptic curves that are defined in Weierstrass form. So this is just your typical elliptic curve. So for those of you who have seen this before, this picture, right, this is right here, the red. This is the elliptic curve. So, basically the elliptic curve is the set of points x, y, such that this equation here is satisfied. And so for every a and b parameters, you have an elliptic curve that is defined. So as you vary a and b, you get different shapes, and some look kind of like circles and whatnot. Or actually some, I think, pop with a circle like this. There's some weird ones that you can check on Wikipedia. There's interesting ones. So that's the largest, kind of all elliptic curves fall under this, but there are some subfamilies, which I added these two. These are not part of the article, but I've added these two diagrams here. So Weierstrass curves are the largest kind of elliptic curves, but there's a subfamily of elliptic curves here. They're the Montgomery curves as well as the twisted Edwards curves. And those, I mean, those two are the same. I believe they're isomorphic, meaning they're two just different parameterization for the same family, subfamily of curves. But these have really nice properties. So namely the Montgomery curves in this form, they have the Montgomery ladder to be able, I believe it's to do multiplication. I'm not super sure. I think this diagram here shows more. So in Montgomery curve form, you see dedicate point doubling, and this is, I believe that's kind of the I believe, I actually don't know what this means, but I think the M and S represent kind of operations that you need to do. So in different forms, you'll get different speeds for calculating. Of course, some parameterization might have different security trade-offs. So mathematicians have analyzed all of these. You might know the ED 25519 curve, which is used by a lot of people, at least in crypto. Like Cosmos, Solana, a bunch of projects. So this lives in subcurve of this. So I'll have a entirely separate video on this, but for now, we're just talking generically about elliptic curves. Okay, so let's move on. This is your elliptic curve, and right, so there's a strange symmetry here, where he says, okay, right. So he says one of these is horizontal symmetry. I think he meant vertical symmetry. I'm not quite sure, but basically, like you can revolve around the x-axis. All the points are there, and that's just, I mean, naturally because the form here there's a y square, right? So negative y and positive y will both squared give the same number. So that's why. Doesn't really matter. What matters here is let's define the an addition. Okay, so right now what we have, right, is just a purely a set. So we have a set of points here, the red curve, and this is just we start with a set, and now we define an addition on the set. Right. So this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say adding structure to a set. This is basically what all of math is about, right? It's always adding some kind of structure to a basic set. So if you have a group, you basically what we're doing here is adding a group structure. So let's start by defining the addition, and then I won't show, but basically this addition respects all of the group properties. Okay, so typically, the addition is defined geometrically. I believe that's probably how it was discovered. I'm not sure, but it's quite cute. Um, and I think it just helps build your mental and visual model for how elliptic curves. We'll see how this completely breaks down in computer world where we live with, clock arithmetic, modulo, finite fields, because we don't have this nice kind of symmetry and structure that we see here in a field like R2 and underlying like vector space where it's defined. But nonetheless, okay, so the addition, how is it defined? A dot B. So what is A plus B? So you draw the line between any 2 points. So if we're trying to do A plus B, so you draw a line by, this has been proven, but just take my word for it. Any line crosses the elliptic curve at exactly 3 points always. And so you take AB, you draw a line, and it crosses here. So okay, where it crosses, then you take you just take the the flip Y point, and this is C. So this is how addition is defined. Take A plus B, draw the line, go to the reverse Y point, and you get C. So if we continue like this, if you wanted A plus B, right, you draw a line like this, it crosses roughly here, so you get here, this would be your D. And this is how it works. So, okay. Now we've defined the structure, you just take it for granted, or go read other books if you really care about knowing why this is a group. But if you trust me that this is a group, um, meaning that you basically for any 2 point, you always stay in the group, and then the other properties are, uh, I'm blanking now, but basically the four group properties are kind of respected. There is an identity. I guess the identity we need to define is oh, right. Okay, so maybe that's a special case that I should define. So if you take a point and you D, um, so let's call this D, and then what is minus D? Minus D is let's just call this point and say minus D, right? So D plus well, okay, so what do we want? Actually, we want an identity. So let's start with that. So I want D such that D plus the identity, which is usually 1 or whatever. So I think in elliptic curves, they call it O is equal to D. So what is that? So we've said that if we take any 2 points and we draw a line across the elliptic curve at exactly 1 point. So the issue here is that I need to draw a line between D and itself, right? So that line basically is the tangent curve, tangent line right here. And this curve actually will not will not touch the elliptic curve anywhere else. So there's no other point. So what we say to close the elliptic curve, we add another point here, which is O, which is the point at infinity. You can get better geometric intuition by going to a projective space or something. There's other definitions of the elliptic curve, other parametrization. But here we kind of just assume that this point is, kind of a point at infinity. Or you can see it as, kind of this 2D plane, go to the 3D plane and put a point somewhere. But, you can see this as kind of closing the line, if you will. That's kind of the intuition so that you get a full group. And this point at infinity is the identity. So by any line through D and and any line through D and this point at infinity doesn't cross the line anywhere else except for at D. So basically D um, is the result um, of this addition. So it's not pretty, but it actually works. And the nice thing here is that if you take D plus minus D, right? So now we also get inverses, which is the other group property that we need. So if you have D and you take minus D here, and you add them up, now again, you define the line that's touching both of those points, and again, it um, doesn't intersect the elliptic curve anywhere else, uh, which is why this point at infinity kind of comes and saves us, and we say that it actually intersects the curve at that third point, right? So it's like a magic point that comes and and makes the group into, it turns the group into a group. So very important point. Um, okay. Um, okay, so right, so now we have the structure. Why is it interesting? Because of this. It turns out that if you have 2 points, an initial point dotted with the self n times to arrive at a final point, finding out n when you only know the final point and the first point is hard. So what does this mean? This is basically, okay, so what we're saying in math symbols is that given a and a to the n, meaning a plus blah, 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 plus a n times, um, finding n is hard, right? And this is called the discrete log problem. Right, why? Because, a to the n, you take the log of log base. If you take log base n of a to the n, you kind of get n. Sorry, log base a, I guess. Anyways, I guess it's just an analogy, but um, um, right. The mapping is not fixed, but I guess in this case it would be the log of a to the n equals to n. So it's basically how do you get the reverse point? So if we go quickly and draw this curve again, so okay, so let's say what we have is this curve, and then we start with an a somewhere, a. Then we say what is a plus a? So a plus a, again, tangent curve, boom, hits here. So we get this, boom, we cross here. So this is a squared. What is a cubed? Then we take a and a squared like this. So where does it cross? It crosses here. So we cross the y-axis, we go here, this is a cube. And you can keep playing this game, and eventually you'll land with a point an. And what we're saying is that if someone just gives you this point, even though so if someone gives you these 2 points, you actually don't know how many times a was added to itself to get this point, right? And so that's kind of okay, so this is the beauty of elliptic curves, and this is basically the trap function. So I will get into more details about this, but I guess let's ponder on this for a little bit before we continue. So what he says here, he has a kind of a nice analogy. So to continue our bizarro billiard metaphor, imagine one person plays our game alone in a room for a random period of time. So the game of just like, um, raising a to some power. So just adding a to itself. So a plus a plus a. Well, sorry. So here would be a times a times a. Basically, you can always see, the elliptic curve has one operation. It's a group. So people often write it as, G with plus, and in that case, you would say a plus a plus a, blah, blah, blah. So here we'd say n times a, but other times it's written with the operation multiplication. So here we say a times a times a. Note that, and then we would say a to the n. So these can confuse you, but they shouldn't because they're essentially the same. They're just a reparameterization. Basically there's one operation. It really doesn't matter what it's called. It has nothing to do with the plus or the multiplication that you're used to on normal kind of vector spaces, or the field, or real numbers that you're used to. Um, so that's that. Okay, so then he's saying, right, so if you're in a room and you're playing this billiard ball and you just every time you play the billiard board, the ball is playing this analogy of adding A, and then you boom, you get somewhere else. You add A again, you get somewhere else. You add A, you get somewhere else. If someone walks into the room later and they see the ball at a new place, how many times did you hit the ball? They have no idea. They can't come back. So that's why it's a good trapdoor function. Of course, this is just an analogy. It breaks down because this kind of analogy would also work with a simple group like if you're just looking at the clock arithmetic on ZP, where you just say, the same numbers, it's just like, let's say you start with a generator, uh, I don't know, K to the N mod P, it would also work. Although in here, we actually have ways to solve the log problem. So the analogy breaks down there, but I will get back to that and explain more. Okay, so let's continue. So what is he talking about here? Oh, okay, I see. So here I think he's getting into, okay, so here he's getting into the computer side of things. Um, right, okay, so I see. So we have to restrict ourselves to numbers in fixed range. So I think it's the part where, okay, now we need to work with computers, so we need to put bounds on our numbers. We're working with like U60, 64s or whatever. So that's where he's going. And then, right, so he says this. So, now we were used to seeing this nice curve. Now, when instead you go to discrete space, so you only take the integer points on. So now you no longer have x, y, living in R. You actually have x, y both living in some finite field, P, meaning the numbers, from 0 to some prime number, 0, 1, blah, 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 to P. Um, um, in this space, then your elliptic curve kind of breaks down. It becomes this. Good luck, kind of. Seeing any geometric intuition, you lose all of that. But interestingly enough, all the properties kind of still remain, which is why it's awesome. And so actually in the actual article on the internet here, this diagram is actually a GIF and it's moving. But I think what he's showing is that I think there's a point A here. What is it? A goes to B, something like this. Right, so he's saying if you're adding A to B, how do you do that? You do the same thing. Even in this space, you'll do this. The only thing is that this curve will kind of continue. And you continue something like this. And then once you reach here, you just continue and then you'll hit this point, so this is the place where okay, note that this point here was not hit. My drawing is just bad, but this is C, which is equal to A plus B. Oh, sorry, this is wrong. This is not C. You need to cross the x-axis. So this is C actually. This is C. Right. So that's the idea. Okay, so now we have this, and then he starts talking about how do we use this for encryption or signing messages. So first we need a primitive of hashing. We need to hash to this curve. So he starts talking about this. So this entire thing is just like, hash to curve, which is a whole field in itself, but we start with a message, and you could imagine taking a message and setting it as the x coordinate and solving for y to get a point on the curve. So what he's saying is if you start again, like he did before, where you take a message, you UTF-8 encode it to get numbers, and then you say, okay, that's my x coordinate, then I'll just walk up and see if I cross. If I hit a y, boom, then I'll say, okay, this is the hash of this message. Set it like this. But so the issue is that often there will be x's that don't have y's. So there are many ways to fix this issue, and so there are many different hash to curve algorithms. I think the simplest one, basically, if you if you get an x which doesn't have a y, you just do x plus one, and then you go up and then you'll find. The issue with this is that you can do x plus one many, many, many times, and so the algorithm is actually, um, can take quite a while. So I think there are some bounded time algorithms that hash differently. Um, but yeah, I think there's a interesting IEE, what is it called? IETF paper about this, um, which I think Justin Drake is part of. I might be misremembering though. Okay, but so now we're here in elliptic curve. What does this all mean? The elliptic curve discrete logarithm is the hard problem underpinning elliptic curve cryptography. So, okay, this is what I was saying before, right? So, um, despite almost 3 years of research, mathematicians still haven't found an algorithm to solve this problem that improves upon the naive approach. So if we take a step back and think back to RSA, RSA was secure because of the difficulty of prime factorization, whereas here in elliptic curve world, why is it hard? It's um, the so the equivalent basically of RSA, which is EC DSA, um, um, is in fact kind of the algorithm that you want to make harder. Any of the primitives built upon this elliptic curve are hard because um, this discrete log problem is hard. So it means if I give you a to the n, you cannot find n. If you couldn't, all of this would be broken. If you could do it faster, we would need also larger keys, but we still haven't. So this is why when you go on GitHub again or use SSH, you can have a very small elliptic curve cryptography, ED25519 or other curve public key compared to the one that you would have if you use RSA. Okay, so here he again just keeps on comparing comparing this, and so what am I talking about here? Right, so elliptic curves in action. Okay, so this is kind of getting to the end of elliptic curves, and so he gives a bunch of interesting use cases. So remember that this was in 2013, which means today it's definitely out there. Everyone's using it. Probably everything you can think of is using it. But SSL and TLS and HTTPS is the main one, I guess, that everyone would interface with every day. So he gives an example here. If you're accessing this very blog post, this very article on the internet using HTTPS, then you will land and you will see this. Right, so if you kind of click in your browsers and you're able to get this information, and then the connection uses TLS 1.2, and you can see it's using ECDHE RSA as the key exchange mechanism. So ECDHE is, so he goes here, it's just the elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman ephemeral. I actually don't know what ephemeral means here. I thought E would be exchange, but basically this is doing the key exchange, which means we use the elliptic curve to agree upon a secret key, a symmetric secret key, which we then use to encrypt our traffic back and forth, because it's much faster to do symmetric cryptography than it is to use public key cryptography all the time. So that's the idea. And then he shows that the Cloudflare is ECC curve, same curve used by Google. So they all have these crazy properties, depending on the A's and B chosen. So these crazy large numbers. So in blockchain world or crypto, people are definitely used to some curves like SECP. What is this? K1 is a Bitcoin one, and the Ethereum one. There's SECP R1, and then for doing the KZG commitment and aggregation, I mean, there's the BN254, there's BLS 12381. People are also use the ED25519, which this actually lives in it is very different. Although I guess these pairing curves are also very different. So we'll see all of these curves have different properties. This means different mathematical structure on top of the basic structure that we've seen so far in this article. So the next videos will basically be taking this as a stepping stone and then adding extra structure that we will be able to use to do different things. Uh, some of them, like here, just being able to calculate, do cryptography much faster. Um, Whereas the ones here will be able to, with these curves, will be able to do crazy things like multi-signatures. So having a single small signature that is actually an aggregate of many people have assigned it. Or you can also do threshold signatures for the same thing or KZG commitments. So we'll dive into all of this. Um, so, oh, I guess another interesting property that I actually didn't know before reading this is that an ECDSA signature with a 256-bit key is over 20x faster than RSA signature with 20,000. So for the same level of security, ECDSA is not only kind of smaller, it's also much faster, which is interesting. Um, there's also a very fun fact here that so just this week, I guess this was in 2013, but Cloudflare started using an assembly optimized version of ECC that more than doubles the speed of ECDHE, so the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So this they did by actually forking Go, which is crazy. So I'm assuming now in 2025 they don't still maintain their fork of Go, although I don't know, I'd be curious. But they were maintaining a fork of Go with this. I actually don't know why they had to fork Go instead of just writing a library with some assembly code. Perhaps it was, early Go days, so they didn't have everything that they needed in the assembly package, would be my guess, but I'm not quite sure. Um, okay, and if we keep going, so there's also, so this is the very famous kind of NSA backdoor that was reported. And that kind of broke everything, and it especially broke trust in a lot of things. And then potentially as a reaction, or I don't know, but Daniel Bernstein is a very, very famous cryptographer, came up with curve 25519, which is the curve that I said above, like that is used in ED 25519. So um, we'll also see that curve a bit later. But apart from that, other interesting things, the ECS. Okay, right. So the one, I guess, of everything, the one drawback that ECDSA does have compared to RSA. So I guess it's not flat out better on every aspect, is that it requires a good source of entropy, which was related to the issues above. Um, and so, okay, so if we kind of look at why this happens, and let's just end with this. So it happens because, let's say we look at the different algorithms. And right, so the source of randomness. So I mean, we're used to for signing things, for hiding certain things. Typically, we need to add to have a source of randomness. So in RSA, this source of randomness is basically only needed once during the setup, and this is for finding your two primes that multiply to give you the n, which is the modulus of the group you're using. So it's basically once, you only need randomness once, and that's it. And then you can encrypt like as many or sign as many messages as you want. Whereas when we look at ECDSA, which is the curved digital signing algorithm, you need randomness per signature. So this is the one fallback or drawback of using ECDSA. So it gives you smaller keys, faster verification time, but it requires a source of randomness. I don't know how much of an issue this is nowadays. There's even like the Beacon project, which has decentralized randomness source. There's a bunch of things. I'm actually not aware of how big of an issue this is anymore, but it definitely is a thing to note. So one thing that we'll look at in a next video is BLS. BLS signatures, meaning it's a signature, basically just a signature using an elliptic curve that has the additional a pairing structure. So when you have that, you can do multi-signatures and threshold signatures, but this basically gives you back the once during setup. So this is a way, which is really nice, to actually add some extra structure on top of your basic elliptic curve group to get rid of the drawback. So what you incur because of this, we'll see in a future video. I mean, it's some extra property that gives a little bit more information to, at least a little bit more information. So far, it actually doesn't seem to impact security, but it could definitely. Okay. So actually, I lied. Let's do one example. Example one. Just the Diffie-Hellman key exchange because we've built all of this structure. Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So we've built all of this structure, and it would be criminal to, to just end the video here and not show how this is actually used, especially for people who are not who are just learning about elliptic curves during this video. So, okay, so the whole point, we have Alice. Okay, so Diffie-Hellman key exchange is basically the same thing that you're used to, that you've seen if you learned it before, but so two people communicating over insecure communication can agree to a shared secret. So let's say Alice starts with a secret A, Bob starts with a secret B. Alice computes G to the A. Again, this means we assume that we have a group G, which is an elliptic curve. With an operation multiplication. This is an elliptic curve here. So we assume, and we also assume, I guess as an extra setup phase, that there's a G element, which we call the generator, which is just an element that everyone agrees to. You can choose, I believe, any element. And it's just the starting point at which we kind of, we'll do G plus G plus G plus G n amount of times. So, well, here A amounts of time. So Alice computes G to the A and she sends this over to Bob. And then Bob computes G to the A to the B. And then Bob also computes G to the B on his side and he sends this over to Alice and Alice computes G to the B and she raises this to the A. Again, raising just means adding, GB A amounts of time or multiplying A amounts of time to itself. And then, okay, so I'll show quickly that this, gives G to the AB and this gives G to the AB. I will show why quickly. But then, so both basically now have agreed on this G to the A to the B, and anyone listening on the traffic here, any eavesdropper, only has access to GA and GB. And with this, they are not able to reproduce. They can't recreate GA to the B. There's no way. And that's kind of this is kind of the fundamental property. So we'll look into this in more detail in the next video. For now, just take my word for granted. So once you have this G A to the B, remember that this is an element of the elliptic curve, which means we can write it as a pair XY. And then we'll just say both of them take X as the secret. And this is the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So the point is we just need to land, typically with these things, you want to land with an element of U 256 or something. So, you might take X and some part of Y, whatever, concatenate it together, treat those as this number that the secret that you need, the amounts of bits. And okay, so now just to finish off real quick. So why is GA to the B equal to GB to the A? Because this is what? This is GA times GA times blah, 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 times GA, B times. And so what is this? This is G times blah, 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 times G, A times, and then this times G times blah, 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 times G, A times, and all of this B times, right? Okay, so I think you're following at this point. So it's just D times G times blah, 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 times G, and this, A times B times. And so then you can, again, kind of, this gives GAB. So you can group them also in the other way, and then you'll get GB to the A. And this is why here we had that both Alice, which computed G to the B to the A, and Bob, which computed G to the A to the B, both computed the same secret. So the crazy part, I guess to end on, which we'll dive into a lot more detail in the next video, when we look at Vitalik's article about pairings, is that we'll see that basically at a fundamental kind of abstract level, the elliptic curve as well as the field um, are both isomorphic, meaning that, at the end, like the elliptic curve in many cases is just how do we call it? Like a cyclic group, which means you take G times G times G squared, G cubed, G to the fourth, like this, G to the N, you end up at the infinity point, and infinity times G, you land back at G, and you generate the group like this. So there's a fundamental theorem that just says any cyclic group is isomorphic to the integers modulo p with an addition structure. So basically, you can think of any elliptic curve here. I'm probably lying there. I'm sure there are some elliptic curves that actually don't respect this, but at least the subgroup generated by G, the elliptic curve itself is probably not, but the subgroup of the elliptic curve generated by G is a cyclic group. And so it's isomorphic to FP, but because of like the main difference, right, why we need to go to this other space, why we need to go to this elliptic curve, which is in 2D, like with these numbers embedded in 2D on this curve, is just because this weird billiard ball additive structure is computationally expensive to do. So it takes time to raise G to the A, which means it also takes time to kind of go the reverse way, right? You would need to try every number, G, and then keep like adding like this until you find kind of the G to the N, right? So if you start with G, the point is you can just do your like an adversary that they have G is a public parameter. They can just raise G plus G plus G plus G plus, or sorry, G times G times G times G. They can do this as much as they want and hope that eventually they land right on the G to the AB. Um, but well, okay, sorry. In this case, it doesn't even make sense because we have G to the A, G to the B. But let's say in another case where you're just trying to do the log problem and get back on N. So you have G to the N and you're trying to find N. You could just raise, multiply G by itself. But the point is, if you take a subgroup that is large enough, um, just good luck reaching there, right? You basically will not even, it just takes exponential amount of time, and that's the bit security. There's 256 bits of security. It means you need to basically search through, on average, half of the space. So that means, that's why that's why you need 256 bits to get 128 bits of security, something like that. Um, um, so that's the idea. But the point is, when you're working with clock arithmetic, right, just the modulo, the integers kind of modulo p, doing the log is actually super easy. Also because I think, well, so we do have clever algorithms, I believe, to kind of search the space. But I think even just computing it would be much faster. So you could probably run through those numbers much faster. Whereas on the elliptic curve, you can't. So the structure is kind of the same abstractly, but on the elliptic curve, it's computationally very expensive. And this basically gives it its nice structure, which is crazy. I mean, there is more to it. It's not only kind of stupid search. There's also the fact that we don't have a structured way to search the space, right? The only search algorithm that we have is literally to try everything. Um, but yeah, so I hope this gave some kind of intuition for what elliptic curve cryptography are, how it's different from RSA, and that this wasn't kind of too much hand waving. If it is, I would love to know, get feedback, and improve for the next videos. But the next video I plan to cover pairings. Namely, I'll start with Vitalik's article. And so we're going to be starting with these elliptic curves. So review them if this didn't make sense to you yet. We'll start with these pairings, which we'll assume. I mean, I will keep repeating some of the structure here and re-exposing them in different angles, but Mainly what we want to do is to add a second structure. So not only do we have the group structure on the elliptic curve, we also will have a pairing, which will be a structure between the group and an extension of that group. Anyways, all big words, but we'll see how it works next time. And it gives some really nice property that all of you are familiar with. So I'm looking forward to doing that. All right. See you guys next time.